What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Hollywood Already Did It presents a history of sitcoms through Wandavision. Of course, I am your host, Blake Schultz, and with me today is Terrence Tatum
Hello, everyone.
and Jamie Jarek.
Greetings.
And we are in episode 5, a very special episode. This is it. This is now my favorite one. I cannot believe some of the stuff we're about to talk about. Avoid spoilers, stay away from us. We're gonna get really into this. This was insane. We had the 80s, we had sword, we have crazy cameos, we have so much information. Guys, what did you think of this episode? Give me some thoughts.
I mean, I agree it was the best solely because it was the first one we got that was half sword, half sitcom. So like it was the best of both worlds. And obviously the ending is changing the fabric of Marvel forever, which is very exciting. And we got badass Wanda, and that I can't wait to talk about that Family Ties / Growing Pains opening. It's the funniest thing I've ever seen.
It's glorious. I loved it. As soon as before I clicked it, I saw that the running time was 42 minutes. I was like, yes, we're getting longer. This is going to be a good time. I'm all in. And I was in from head to toe. I'm an 80s kid. I was cognizant and aware of what I was watching. So Family Ties was a big part of me, that era of comedy. So as soon as I saw the airbrush come up and the paintbrush, I was like, yeah, here we go. I know all of this and I know all of it. I couldn't stop smiling from ear to ear. From then to the point of Wanda coming out of that bubble and just wrecking shop, saying, hey, don't F with me. I was all in. And there are so many small threads that are placed in this episode too, outside of the big stuff that we see. Like we get Monica possibly being powered because her DNA and stuff is no longer the way that it used to be. I was like, we're just going all in. I'm in.
And possibly there's something going on with her and Carol that's not okay. And
right.
I'm so nervous.
The way she responds to hearing Captain Marvel's name, she is not about the happiness the little girl who made that outfit back in the day.
And I love that we keep getting these, we're the audience in Darcy, Jimmy, and them. When he has Wanda could have taken out Thanos. There was a blitz. So is Captain Marvel. I was like, oh my God, I'm on a playground at recess with all my friends.
It's conversations we've had, Blake.
I tweeted a joke like, this is literally Marvel Twitter. Like the who is stronger between Carol and Wanda comes up all the time on Twitter.
It's all I see. And every time I see it, I love it. I'm never tired of it. I could watch her wrap Thanos around for hours. It could be the whole movie.
Yeah.
But I agree. The world building in this episode was incredible because I feel like the implications of their DNA not being the same implies that this bubble, this hex, which I also love the hex comment. I was disappointed when they were like, does she have a silly name? We were like, no, it's just Wanda. And I was like, you put some respect on
We're getting it.
Witch.
Yeah, we have.
Elizabeth Olsen has said that we're gonna get Scarlet Witch. It's coming. I couldn't believe it didn't happen in that moment, but it's gonna happen.
But I just love it. These could all be the X-Men. This bubble, if her DNA is going to be altered, this could be our gateway to MCU X-Men, or the start of it. We could find out that everybody has had dormant powers, a la how they do it in Deadpool. They just aren't awake yet. The Mind Stone woke up hers and Pietro's, and now we're going to wake up all of these people, and then we're going to wake them all up. And then the cameo to end all cameos.
At 12:40, I screamed like a small child. I was like, because I think I had talked to people and I was like, oh yeah, I definitely see that Pietro is going to be at the door. Like, I think that she's going to get Quicksilver. So what I thought, however, was that we were going to get out the Quicksilver that she knows, not the one that we got.
I had read some stuff that indicated that it was going to be Evan Peters, so I thought he was actually more likely, but I still didn't believe it. I just, even though I read rumors, seeing Evan Peters in the MCU oh boy, I can't get over it. I've watched it 3 times because I'm just so amazed.
Oh yeah, it's the thing that I don't think anyone believed could happen. Now we have bought the studio just for this one moment. We're getting everything. I remember a time where we didn't think Spider-Man was going to be in these movies. I remember a time where we thought the X-Men was a pipe dream, and we are now just the endless possibilities, except for a solo Hulk movie with distribution rights at Universal. But that's a different
not
conversation.
happening.
But we'll get there.
Can somebody do like some kind of, just put Ruffalo in the Incredible Hulk? Somebody, like, we have the technology, please. I want that so bad. It can be the same movie. I don't even dislike Norton. I have no problem with Norton. It's just I want to see Ruffalo do it.
We might be opening this up more than we realize. Maybe we'll get some old school Rhodey and old school Hulk showing up. Everybody who's been recast is back.
It's so funny. My wife, and this is probably a lot of audiences too. My wife did not. She's seen the X-Men and she's seen Quicksilver, the MCU version, but she did not realize that was the Quicksilver for that. And I explained it to her then, and the first thing she said was like, "Please don't bring back Norton." And I was like, "I agree."
There's a lot of things.
Norton, I'm pretty sure, was like a problem with Norton. So
right.
I think that was a Terrence thing too. Like Terrence and Norton are kind of like just problematic people. I don't think that they're coming back.
Yeah, I believe Terrence Howard's situation is that he was the highest paid actor at the time of Iron Man. And then when that dollar bill switched, he said, "I want more." And they were like, "That's so cute."
And then when he wasn't, goodbye.
See, Cheadle is infinitely better in every way. Like, there's great. Just no.
When he shows up in Iron Man 2 and does the "I'm here, it's me, deal with it," I just was like, this is the best way to handle this. This is incredible.
Yes.
And my understanding of the Ed Norton situation was that he has it in his contract that any script he's a part of, he can just rewrite and do whatever he wants. And when he got on the set, it was like, "I have some things to say." Joss Whedon was like, "Well, then you have other movies to make." And that was the end of that conversation.
Nice.
But we also in this one got what I thought was incredible, which was their first argument that we see. And it was done in the most genius way. We're going to end the episode, the credits are rolling, and Vision says no. Showing again that Wanda is in full control of this entire simulation. She is restarting the clock every night when she goes to bed and wakes up in the morning. And watching those credits blow away was so akin to Too Many Cooks and other silly sitcom moments.
Yeah.
I loved it. And then the acting that both of these characters do in this argument, the floating up, the yelling, this was a level I had not seen either of them do within the context of the MCU. Obviously, they are both incredible actors with long, wonderful roles. But this was, give me more.
Vision was so pissed and angry, and just to see her response saying, "You've never spoken to me in that manner," was like, oh my God, this is chilling. Like, this is amazing.
In his contract, we also solved my little problem of, well, we can just rebuild Vision. Why isn't he in Endgame and anywhere else? It's in his will. Don't bring me back.
Yeah,
I'm done. Thanos gets me.
That was a smart little thing. I love that you brought up Too Many Cooks, because somebody else brought this up and I didn't think of it. But Too Many Cooks is, I think, one of the most brilliant creations that has ever existed. And listeners, if you have not watched that for some reason, please go Google it. And what is it, like 14 minutes? It's not that long. I don't know. It's the Lars von Trier as Pi, I think, is the single funniest joke in the history of comedy. So check that out.
Yeah, no, that's I would argue it's necessary viewing for a history of sitcom show now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Speaking of the history of sitcoms, unless there's more to say on this episode, which I'm sure there is, and I'm sure we'll remember it as we go. Oh, one last thing I want to say. When that sword leader says that she joined Hydra voluntarily, and Jimmy Woo gets up and is like, "That's an oversimplification, sir." I loved it. He's no Agent Coulson. We can throw this guy out. But that's such a smart way of showing how the world will view mutants, or even superheroes in general. We already see this divide.
Yeah. I also really dug the Agnes. We didn't really talk about Catherine in this, but Agnes being the one person that she has no control of, and she's just seeing weird-ish all the time. But her breaking the fourth wall and being like, "Can we do this? Let me check that over again?" I was like, that's amazing, because whatever's happening in this world, Wanda does not have her in control.
It's clearly Wanda and Agnes. They are
Right.
somehow working congruently. Because she also didn't do Pietro. When that knock happened, she's like, that wasn't me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, something else is going on. But that's not what this podcast is about.
No. Let's talk about the 80s. Guys, the 1980s was a fascinating time for television. Mostly because cable television is on the rise. The sitcom as we knew it in the 50s, the 60s, and 70s is a dying breed. Kids are now seeing more violence than they've ever seen on television. We're starting to have the conversations of, does it affect the youth? We've had this conversation with rock music before, comic books. Now we're going to have it with television. Soon we'll have it about video games. I'm sure we're having it now about something I don't even know is a medium because I'm an old man.
TikTok?
That would have been my guess.
It has to be affecting something. It's definitely affecting me. These conversations are starting to happen. A study shows that a kid will come home from school and see 8,000 to 100,000 murders on television before dinner. A preposterous analogy. And yet, Game of Thrones got up there.
Yeah.
So then, amidst all of this, more competition, we're seeing shows get more serious. We're seeing conversations get more serious. Shows are now reflecting a changing family. We're having dads doing cooking and lawn work, stuff we had never seen. Moms are working. And in the middle of this, showing our change from the liberalism of the 60s and 70s into a staunch conservatism in the 1980s, we have Family Ties, showing us a family rejecting his counterculture parents, most of the comedy coming from him finding a way to attain material wealth, something that a lot of kids at that time were starting to go, we were so concerned with this. What's the problem with having things? Became a staunch point of view in the 80s as we pushed closer to a Republican regime, for lack of a better word. A lot of people started going, well, what's wrong with having a few things? What's wrong with making a little bit of money? Maybe we've gone a little too far in our neoliberalism. If this sounds like the opposite end of the spectrum we're on now, it is because now we are done with that.
Yes, the pendulum has swung back.
Bye. It's funny. Family Ties I was familiar with, and but I could only remember because I've seen it as a kid. But all I could remember is Alex P. Keaton was Michael J. Fox, and he was like a conservative kid. But I forgot how much his parents were liberal. In that first season, the opening credits are like them and like their hippie stage, like with the babies, like before they got their suburban life. And in case people aren't aware, the opening credits, like Terrence had said earlier, it is very much I think it's like season 2 is when that
season
comes
2
in.
they switched to the painting. Yeah,
to the painting, but then there's a mixture of growing pains, which is where you show them aging up. But the Family Ties thing, I watched a bunch of Family Ties last night because I loved it. I was so into it.
It's such a good show.
It's really good, and I was really impressed. Like only in like the second or third episode, Alex loses his virginity, and the girl like kind of ditches him, and his dad has like such great advice, which is like, it's not all like you're gonna have to go through some relationships and whatever. And he never got like upset that he lost his virginity. He was 17. His dad never made him feel bad about that. He just gave him the harsh realities of romances. And it's interesting because I googled it, and like the first thing that came up was like one of those stupid parental like conservative websites that was like, don't think the nostalgia of Family Ties is good for your children. Here, Alex P. Keaton loses his virginity, and I was like, oh my god, I can't believe like even shows like the Family Ties are getting that kind of backlash.
It's funny. It's a very like obviously family show. It's you got the mother and father. The mom, and this one, the mom's a feminist, like super feminist, but she's also a hard worker. Like she's an architect. Like she's building shit. She's making as much money as the public broadcasting dad. Like so, that's a 2-family income. You got a Republican kid. You got a sort of flighty sister, and then you got the tomboy. So you have a little bit of everything covered. And this show, while being a comedy and dealing with the stuff just in her family. This show, if you go through these seasons, there's a lot of stuff that this show deals with as far as like assault and losing your virginity, alcoholism. Like it, you think of it, it does it, and it does it in a way that it's handled quite well. But then it'll do like the next episode after, it'll kind of like, all right, let's calm that down a little bit so we can kind of go back to being just a straightforward comedy. But we're also still going to touch on these issues. I know I saw Jamie's Twitter that she went down the Tom Hanks rabbit hole.
I did. I think I deleted that tweet because I decided I wanted to save the images for when I plug this episode of this podcast.
Gotcha.
But I'm glad you brought that up because I watched all 3 Tom Hanks
I
episodes.
said, did you do the third one? Cool.
Yeah. So the first 2 are him, like he took a bunch of money from work, but it was for like a noble cause, and the FBI was after him. But the third one was he like is an alcoholic, and he like hits Alex, and it's really like, and it's Tom Hanks, so it's obviously like a really like you're in it, you're in this performance, and he like drinks a whole bottle of vanilla extract.
Yeah,
it's like really wild. And but what I'm hoping is I'm interested, is Pietro going to be like the troubled uncle? Like I know we're going to be in the 90s, and I saw somebody think that mention the uncle from Married with Children, and I'm gonna have to do some Married with Children research. I haven't watched that show in 20 years. But I also, one that came to mind was Daphne's brother on Frasier, who's like the like kind of the just bumbling like kind of an asshole drunk like funny guy, and I don't want Evan Peters to be like too dramatic. Like I don't want him to be fucking Tom Hanks hitting kids. But I have a feeling there's going to be a little bit of drama there.
I do too. I think that I am not of the belief necessarily that is actually a version of Pietro. I think there's more to it, and so I think it could get dark. And I do think like something like Married with Children is probably one of those shows, or Roseanne, because I think that this seems to be the episode where we keep seeing those Halloween outfits. That seems to be sort of the best show for that, because they love the Halloween stuff. But this stuff with family ties. What's interesting about this show is that it was a mixture of family ties and growing pains, because 80s sitcoms is also when they started doing that invasive music just incessantly throughout the show. You're like, where is that music coming from? Why are we just, I have a message, let's sit down and talk, kids. This music's going to play while I do this. And that was sort of the beginning of that. And this show nails that, because every time they sit down and have those talks, that's what happens.
Yeah, a very special episode.
You get a lot of like, we got to talk about life and death, kids. And I might be manipulating the fabric of reality, but there was also a lot of, I think, themes of growing up kind of baked into this, and not doing it too quickly and dealing with the things you have to deal with. And I feel like that's something else that a lot of these 80s sitcoms had in it too, growing pains. We're about to get to the 90s when I think these shows started becoming about growing up and less about perfection. And I feel like this episode, the cracks are sort of starting to show, and through the kids, we're really seeing this like Wanda having to deal with herself when the dog dies. Which Tom King Sparky is going to be in it. If we get a robot dog, I will lose my mind.
I was mad this Sparky wasn't the green. Let's give me so I'm hoping that let's bring him back in a robot form.
I think we're getting there. I'm like, it's all there. But we start seeing that here where Terrence is right. They're going to sit down. Let's get in. The music's going to start. And I think this show uses it to show Wanda's hypocrisy a little bit, that we start kind of getting into her realizing maybe what she's doing through the lens of having to teach these children. Because when things are perfect, they're perfect. You don't think about your actions. Right. It's when no one really cares when something bad happens until it affects the people they care about, I think is a big theme. And a lot of even in, you go back to Family Ties, a lot of that was the son doing something for his own benefit, and then it being like, hey, hold on, now this affected other people. You can't just go around being a conservative and not caring about people, as he isolated half his audience. We don't need him.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting. And I think when you even look at like the cable television side of this, right? You do have Sword coming in and different styles. We saw the aspect ratio change. We're watching a show compete with itself, referencing a decade that was constantly fighting against something it had never fought before. The rise of cable TV, like the rise of streaming, like the rise of the home box office, like any change in the entertainment industry, terrified the people who have been doing it for too long. because they are very afraid that things are going to change and disrupt it. And that's when you had
Yeah.
Wanda reference the first X-Men film with the guns, which was also great.
So
Yes.
I think at my work, someone wrote about it, but they said it was inadvertent, and I should have read the article. I didn't. That's a classic mistake. But like that had to have been on purpose. I'm sorry, that could not have been a coincidence.
That was
she did that.
way too close.
Yes, it's way too close, and I think having someone like Kevin Feige involved, since he was involved with that too, he knows what that shot what that means.
He started on that movie,
right? So I'm like, he knows what he's doing there.
Yeah, he's been waiting to do this since he made Iron Man. He's been in the background of Daredevil and X-Men, watching people make mistake after mistake.
Yeah, he's been sitting and top by. I'm idly by while people just keep butchering the X-Men. He's like, I'm going to get my chance.
Not that I don't like.
That's why, like, I really want. Like, I just want the same X-Men cast. I don't want them to recast anyone. I want Kevin Feige to have a chance with all those actors. I know that's probably not going to happen.
Well,
but in my perfect world, we get them all back.
He sat down with Patrick Stewart a year or two ago.
Yeah.
And apparently Patrick Stewart's response was, I would love to work with you, but Logan was just too perfect. My character was just too good. Like, if we hadn't made this movie, I would be in the MCU. And we know that
which, by the way, he should have gotten an Oscar nomination for. But
I agree. Logan's fantastic.
Yeah. I have trouble with Logan. I've only seen it 3 times because it just bums me out.
It's a heavy movie.
It's so depressing.
It's a heavy film.
It's a fantastic film, but there's a reason I've only seen it 3 times. Where it makes me so sad, which is a testament to James Mangold and like the whole, like, they did a great job. I just don't want to watch it that often.
Oh no, it's not a movie that I put on for funsies.
Yeah.
No. But I think also Hugh Jackman was quoted being like, yeah, if they brought me in for an Avengers movie, I'd do the character again. Like, whatever. And if there's one thing Disney has, it is dump trucks of money. I've seen them on Laurel Canyon. It's something to behold. And it's blowing out of the top. Terrence, this is your decade.
Yeah.
The 80s. We are in your world. What are the other major sitcoms that you would have liked to have seen or noticed that I may not have seen in this?
There are a lot of 80s. Like 80s family sitcoms were pretty massive. Like Different Strokes existed, Facts of Life, Golden Girls, even though it's not a family-based dynamic, it still is a family unit because they're all together.
There was a little Golden Girls nod that someone pointed out online. There was like one of the kitchen ornaments, like I think it was a lobster, was one of the Golden Girls kitchen things was in the WandaVision kitchen, which I never would have caught, but I saw it.
I wouldn't have. Oh, Golden Girls has a huge following and fan base, so I could see if somebody picked that up. That was a huge fan. Married with Children came in towards the tail end of the 80s. That's a part of that too. There's a lot of those shows. Alf was one there too. There's a lot of those shows that sort of existed as the bridge between the mid to late 80s to the early 90s. But family sitcoms were just the norm in that time. Like you could watch 3 in a row. Perfect Strangers, another one. You could just watch them and you're like, oh yeah, these are all right here.
Charles in Charge, who's the boss? Like,
Charles in Charge, who's the boss?
And you mentioned bridge shows, and Full House is kind of a bridge show.
It's a bridge show too.
87, and so Full House is like that's my bread and butter. I love I wrote about Full House so much for BuzzFeed that one of the producers of Fuller House told me that they used my article in the writer's room of Fuller House because I was the only person writing about wanting to see Full House connections. But WandaVision's the Growing Pains, it was all Growing Pains and Family Ties, but there were 2 slight nods to Full House in that opening. We associate Full House with the 90s, but it technically started in the 80s. And there was the very end shot on the blanket was very Full House. Same with them running on that field. That was so Full House. And I feel like they would have done, they would consider more Full House, but it's like awkward because of the Olsen.
It's a weird, you have an Olsen on board. It's a weird thing to touch on to, especially since the newer show doesn't have an Olsen involved. It's like, let's just avoid this altogether.
And Elizabeth had a cameo in the series finale of Full House.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. She was in of all of Mary Kate and Ashley's stuff. She cameoed in that. She cameoed in How the West Was Fun, and my favorite in one. The mystery the mystery videos they did. There's one, I think it's called The Curse of the Thorn Mansion, and Mary Kate and Ashley go on like their little adventure, and Elizabeth wants to go with them, and she's like 5 years old. She's so cute, and they're like, sorry, you can't. And they sing this whole song, and it goes, I'd rather get caught in a twister than have to spend time with my sister, B-U-T-T out. And they just like sing this whole song about how Lizzie can't go with them on their adventure, and it's very adorable. And that's,
I really want a musical episode of this show
so badly,
and I don't think we'll get it, but I feel like it's a need. And I feel like I don't know why there's still so much that we can do once this main story is done. I'll have no issue if they're just like, hey, WandaVision season 2, don't even worry about the timeline. These are just other episodes. She was just making shows this whole time until they found her. There's like, there's 38 of them. Who cares?
I think the other, I'd be remiss to say, I know it's problematic now, but the other 80s show that was huge for me was The Cosby Show. Like, I have to say that show was like, for me, was a staple. Like, as a black middle-class family in Detroit, that was like, oh, wait, there are people like us on television? Because for the longest time, black people were either criminals or the friend of a friend. So to have an entire show about just them and their walks of life it was fascinating to me. And for a while there, I mean, he was America's dad.
I feel like the one thing we are missing in WandaVision is that change in diversity in sitcoms and in media. And it's almost why I'm like, we could have kept Monica in there a little bit longer, if only to do some of the things that Wanda and Vision can't or shouldn't do.
Yeah.
Because there is such a change in the 80s and the 90s and the thousands of, it wasn't perfect, right? We were living this today. We still have a lot to do, but we were seeing that change in such a big, impactful way that it's a shame that we're not going to see it reflected in the show, especially as Marvel itself is starting to push for more inclusion and diversity in this next phase. We're done with the white straight superhero stories. Right. They're out of the game.
I mean, they're obsolete almost. You might have one like Ruffalo's hanging on by a thread. Like, please,
Doctor, you got Doctor Strange.
Yeah. But and like Ruffalo's coming in like on a woman-led show, and
correct.
So is Hawkeye.
I have to say, like, because you brought up Cosby, and it's fucking sorry. I don't know if we curse on the show, but I don't
care. I always mark that it's not for children on YouTube and on the podcast.
My aunt asked me actually if my cousin who's 11 can listen to this podcast, and I was like, I mean, she can, but I don't think she cares about the history of the Dick Van Dyke Show. But the thing, like, Cosby,
get her when they're young, I was Jamie.
Cosby is one of, I think it's a shame because it's one of the funniest sitcoms of all time. When I was in high school, I was so obsessed with it. But I interviewed, I'm not going to say who because it's a little dicey, but I interviewed a WandaVision cast member recently, and I asked their favorite sitcom growing up, and they said Cosby, and then they had to be like, but it's a bummer, he's a rapist and all this, to the point where their reps had to be like, please don't include that in the interview. And I'm only saying this here now because I don't think that's going to get back to those people, and I'm not going to say any names, but it was like a tense moment of my interview where it's like, that does suck. That is such an influential thing.
It's hard to openly admire that show or praise that show now because you're like, oh crap, that's right, there are issues with this.
It's because it's so important on so many levels, but even if it wasn't, take all of that away, it's such a good show.
It's a good show. Like, it doesn't race irrelevant. Like, it's just a well done show. It's funny, like you mentioned how the times were changing, and it reminded me because they could do some things with WandaVision. They just are actively not, and I guess it's probably not really fitting with the storyline. Because I was amazed. I'd forgotten how at the pilot of Family Ties, the parents are openly like, there's the situation that Alex B. Keaton is trying to go into this club, this like boys, like this main club, and the mom kind of has a conversation with like, hey, I don't know if you want to be there. You know that club doesn't allow blacks or Hispanics or anybody that looks different than us in there. And not really a place that you want to be. And I was like, wow, there's an opening episode of a new sitcom. Was like, we don't give a damn. We're just going balls out. This is what we're doing. And I was like, oh, that's fascinating that existed back then.
that's what hooked me into it, because for the purpose of this show, I only needed to watch a couple episodes. But when I watched what I felt like I needed to, I was like, I'm gonna just keep watching Family Ties. And I literally like fell asleep last night watching Family Ties. I watched a bunch of it, and I might continue watching it.
It's very good.
And to the inverse of that, I also watched an episode of Growing Pains. I only watched one because I had to pay for it. I don't know if there's some secret way to watch Growing Pains, but yeah,
it's gonna be on one of these weird streaming services I keep seeing on my Roku, like Philo and these other just no name nonsense quibby wannabes.
Yeah.
So I meant to buy the pilot episode, but I accidentally bought the first episode of season 7, the final season. And I was mad at first until I realized that was the first Leonardo DiCaprio episode.
That's when Leo joins in.
I get to watch baby Leo, so that was exciting. But watching it, and I can't really judge it, because when a show gets to its 7th season, sometimes it's just not quite there.
But
I was just
like,
so maybe if I had started with season 1, I'd feel differently. But I was like, I am not getting the vibe I got with Family Ties. This is just like so basic. There's nothing poignant. There's no good lessons to be had. The only thing I really enjoyed, other than Baby Leo, was seeing Ashley Johnson. Because when I was a kid, I was obsessed with Ashley Johnson because she played Annie in the Annie sequel. And now she's a big deal to a lot of people because of Critical Role, but she was also in Avengers.
All right.
I mean, she's friends with Joss because she was also in Much Ado About Nothing. So it was fun to see that connection, that kind of slight Marvel connection, and she was so cute.
Being an 80s baby, I definitely remember when she popped up on Avengers. I was like, oh, I know her.
Yeah. But ultimately, the Growing Pains episode I was bored. I was like, I'm getting back to Family Ties.
It's a very, very basic, generic comedy. Like you can swap that, like I think Step by Step when the 90s sort of goes in that same thing. Like, they're not really putting any lessons or doing anything new here, where Family Ties was breaking sort of a mold with what they were doing.
Well, and that's what you had to do then. That's why I think when we look back, Growing Pains is remembered, but it's also sort of like there. It would be the end of the NBC lineup today. Like it was like The Office, Parks and Rec, 2 shows we don't remember. And that was it for a while.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure when we get to the 90s, we'll be like Roseanne, Seinfeld, Friends, and then what is this?
And then like, what random show is this? Hanging with Mr. Cooper? How did this get here?
But it goes back to it. Like it was harder in the 80s. I feel like for the first time there was just so much more content, and you saw it everywhere. Right? This is one of the first decades that so many different things define it. And I feel like the 90s gets that too, especially with music, where when I talk to people and I'm like, oh, the 90s was like the rise of pop punk with Green Day and Blink and this, and someone else is like, no, it was all about hip hop. What are you talking about? It's like, well, it was all kind of happening.
Depending on where, like, gangster rap was happening at the same time that punk rock was happening. They were both sort of exploding at once. So yeah, it depends on your point of view. I think it's interesting because, like, we've talked about back in the 80s, there were even less. We have streaming. We can watch networks all over the place. There's far less networks. So yeah, the competition was even higher because you're literally fighting for basically these 3-hour blocks on 3 networks. And that's the fight.
And, I feel like the 80s also started having things that influenced beyond the sitcoms. You had so many cartoons. This is also where Marvel starts influencing itself in this show. Even we were starting to market toys through television. We only had the Transformers wasn't a real show. It was an ad. G.I. Joe wasn't a real thing anymore. We had brought it back after the Adventure Team in the 60s to be like, buy more. That's all it was. Just, it was a marketing device. And I think it's interesting looking at this episode of WandaVision with all of that baked in, because now we're at the climax of all of that. Even the concept of like fandom started in the 80s. You're past Star Wars now. You're living in a world where people are congregating in arcades and comic shops and water cooler talk.
Technically, there was a Marvel series on the air at this point in time. The Incredible Hulk existed in the late 70s, early 80s. So like they could easily be like, hey, it'd be like Inception type layers at that point, but he was like super meta on top of meta. But like Bill Bixby's Incredible Hulk existed at this time.
I feel like now that we have Evan Peters, anything is fair game. Like, where's Lou Ferrigno? Like anything is possible, and I love that.
I know no one wants the Star Wars Marvel crossover except for probably everybody quietly and secretly, but hear me out. Tom Holland has now referenced Star Wars within the context of Marvel. We got to go for the legs like the AT-ATs. So we know that this exists within the popular culture. Wanda has probably seen Star Wars. So it wouldn't be crazy if in her bubble where everything's fake and nothing's real, like, I don't know, her to have a bit conversation with the Mandalorian about raising a kid or Pedro Pascal, and they just go away. It doesn't need to be canon. I just want to know that they can do it. I just want Disney to show me their full power.
I would love. I tweeted that I wanted to see Amy Sedaris and Catherine Hahn like host some kind of event, Disney Plus event together, as like Peli Moto and Agnes. But you say, now that you're bringing this up, it's actually a great sitcom moment that when I was a kid that was such a big deal was the TGIF night where Sabrina ended up like making some kind of like decade thing happen, and she went to Boy Meets World.
She went to every show.
Yeah, and some other shows, and she went to every show, and every show became like a new decade, kind of what's happening in Marvel. And I remember vividly watching that live and being so amazed at the tie-in. And it would be very fun if Disney Plus did something like that. Like you said, it doesn't have to be canon, but if Disney Plus had their own big TGIF event where,
that was big in the 90s. Like, I remember when Urkel showed up on Step by Step, I lost my mind. I was like, wait, what is happening? Yeah.
I mean, he was also on Full House.
Yeah.
I've always been a sucker for crossovers. I love crossovers, and that is the epitome of sitcoms of television. While I don't think I agree, I don't think we're getting a Mandalorian thing. I do think you're right. It's Disney. This is Disney Plus. This is exactly what WandaVision is, and it would be pretty cool if that happened.
At the very least, give me another Lego Christmas special and cross them all over there.
Right, put them all together.
At the very least, because that Lego Star Wars Christmas special was a delight. And this is where I'm like, Netflix, Disney Plus, Peacock, all of it. The best thing that Netflix has made for me is the BoJack Horseman Christmas special that just was an episode of Horsing Around. Mm-hmm. Incredible. Let's start doing the old shit that we were doing in TV. Give me the variety shows. Give me these nonsensical crossover moments. And spend a little bit of money to have Wanda and Vision on Tatooine and not know how they got there, and then be like, Wanda, did you make another world?
And it's clear that they're having fun, and they're taking some of the fun things that sitcoms do. Because the thing that I kept laughing about was the kids aging up, because that happens all the time in sitcoms. Like, and they'll have a baby one season, at the end of the next season, they're like, cool, now there's a 5-year-old person.
Wasn't that Ashley Johnson? Like,
that happened
in
Ashley Johnson, and even Family Ties. Like, Andy was born, and then the next season, he's a 5-year-old running around. Like, okay, hold on, guys.
Well, it even gets into the very real possibility, as Terrence said, this might not be Pietro, this might not be anything. This could just be a super meta, we recast him joke. This could just be a sitcom bit, like, which would be kind of
I hope not,
kind of hilarious.
Yeah, it'd be funny, but it would also be sad because they made us think for a minute that we're getting the X-Men.
We're getting the X-Men, but I've said it on this show.
The X-Men.
Well, that's the thing. This is going to give us the X-Men. But when Marvel does the X-Men, they're not going to do it as a backdoor pilot in WandaVision. This is going to be a tent pole. Come to the theaters when it's safe and there's not a pandemic. Get your popcorn, lose your minds again. The 90s theme song is going to come on, and if it doesn't,
I will still enjoy it, but I will be upset while I do it.
There are opportunities now. We know what works. We did it with Spider-Man. We brought out that 90s logo when we announced Homecoming, and I was excited for years.
Indeed.
All I had to do was see something I grew up with, and I just was like,
it's the same with the Power Rangers movie. I wasn't really feeling it, and then he was like, go, I was like, well, shit, here I am.
This is a perfect film.
This movie is amazing.
It wouldn't be an episode of Hollywood Outrageous
if we did not bring up
the Power Rangers.
100%.
I'm nothing if not on brand.
We're staying on brand.
I rebought the same skateboarding hat that I used to have. We're talking Power Rangers again. It's
I need to send you guys some very cute pictures of me when I was 5 with my hordes of Power Rangers memorabilia that I wish I'd still had.
My goddaughter was doing a fundraiser, and I guess she wanted a Power Ranger outfit, and she was adamant that she got an original. So she has an original Pink Ranger uniform. And I was like, "Well done, you just made Uncle Terrence proud."
Yeah. So this episode, is there anything left to say with this episode and how the 80s relates to it? Is it what are we? We're coming close to the hour. Not that
Oh
time
wow.
matters in COVID-19.
There are 2 things I'd like to bring up. One is that in the other podcast I do, Phase Zero, which is more of a Marvel perspective, this week we had Matthew Berry on, who is ESPN's fantasy football guy. That's all I know about that. But after the show, we were still talking, and he had a really cool theory that as to why as to how we're jumping through the sitcoms, and he said that it feels like we were talking about, like Family Ties, they were really focusing on these important social issues, that it feels like the more serious things get, that's why we're getting further in time, which makes that's so obvious. I was like, why didn't I think of that? Like, yeah, that, and they kind of touch on that in this episode, where it's like Vision says you go to bed and then you change things, and it totally makes sense, like, like death and everything, though that wasn't necessarily being touched on in earlier decades. So now we got to hit it in the 80s, and I really thought that was a cool point. Like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. I like to shout out some fun facts. Like, so I did learn one really fun fact about Family Ties. It's such a stupid fact, but like I have to share it. And it's that Michael Grossman and Meredith Baxter, those are the parents, right? I got those right. They were born on the exact same day.
Yeah.
I really think that's funny. The same day, same year.
Yeah, it is. I looked that up and saw that was fascinating too. It's funny too. It's crazy how much this stuff sticks in my brain, because I thought I did not remember anything, and just watching like the first 3 minutes, the entire episode just triggered back to me. I was, oh yeah, I've seen this one. I know this one. I know this one. It's crazy how much this series ingrained in me, and I completely, until seeing that intro with the paintbrush, it just unlocked everything. Like, oh, there's the cheat code that was locked away that I put away for decades, and then that brought it all back out. But what I really love is that there are moments. Why Family Ties really worked was that there were moments where the dad got involved with having these relationships talk with the kids. That he was very much like, all right, we'd always seen sort of the mom sit down with them, and now this is the first time that the dads are talking to the boys or the daughters, but more so to the boy. And that's why I like this episode when Vision sort of hugs them, the hug he gives them when their dog dies, and he's like, "Oh boys," and just comes over. I was like, "Oh God, that's it." Without even saying any words, that's family. That's the hint, the essence of what Family Ties does.
There was actually a really good Family Ties moment in the episode where Alex loses his virginity, where Alex like mentions he's going to go out with a college girl, and the daughter is like, well, would you be okay if I went out with a college guy? And the dad is like, I didn't say that. and then she's like, well, that's a double standard. And the dad looks at the mom, and she's like, nope. And I love that, because there's one of my least favorite things in the world is like the overprotective dad, like dad with a shotgun kind of a thing. Like, I hate that. I hate how common and normal it is for men to control their daughters' bodies and relationships, and that it's funny that,
or even
that
sisters, because Alex, there's an episode I think right before that where Alex tries to do that with someone that Mallory went out with, and he screams and berates her when she comes back in, but she handled the situation on her own. He kind of was like, "Oh, my bad. You had this.
You can handle this." And I really hate that that's like a trope for fathers. And I love that in that moment he got really called out for it. Like, nobody was defending him. Like, if your son can date a college guy, then your daughter can date a college guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I feel like this was the episode where we got more emotional, we got more dramatic, we got more violence, all of which somehow encompasses the 80s, which is a very interesting thing. It is fun seeing, as the shows continue, us getting more and more, like most shows escalate. We very rarely start with the most dramatic part in the pilot, but watching each decade really hit thematically what's going on. It really makes me wonder. The 90s, in theory, could be a break from it, especially if they're doing Modern Family, which was the show that brought back the family shows.
Well, the '90s would. I think the show. I mean, the two biggest shows that I remember that basically are quintessential '90s would be Married with Children and Roseanne.
And Roseanne did do a lot of heavy.
It gets heavy, especially back
that
into
last season.
that last season gets nuts.
As much as I don't care about the Connors, and I watched the pilot out of curiosity, but I do thank that the Connors for retconning the end of Roseanne, which was my least favorite series finale in the history of sitcoms.
Yeah, that last season was just I jumped off, but it was nuts. I was like, what is happening here? Yeah, that was one season that I was like, I don't think I need to watch this anymore. And yes, the Connors has actively retconned all of that.
Yeah, and again, like, no thank you to the Connors, but I do appreciate that they let Dan live. How dare you kill Dan?
Yeah, John Goodman is a treasure. Stop that.
And we're getting 9 episodes, right? So we have the 9th.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Are we just going? What are we gonna do? Are we just gonna go 90s to Modern Family? Or we skip that?
I think it's gonna go like, I think that's what 90s, like 2000s, because Modern Family did start in the 2000s, and then I have a feeling the last 2 episodes are not going to be.
Are going to be
anymore.
more so. MCU.
Oh, that's going to be a Marvel movie. That's going to be.
What will we talk about in
the
this podcast?
History of Marvel TV. Oh, don't worry. I've thought about. I'm playing the long game with those last 2. I know exactly. We can do a whole history of we can just start doing streaming stuff. This is all on the. I'm going to leave it in. I don't care. We'll do our 90s episode. We'll do our 1000s episode. We'll see what they give us for the finale. But that's a very easy time to just do a simple history of Marvel as television, which has its own long history.
It does.
So just me talking about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. for an hour.
First of all,
hold
we
on.
could do all of it. We could.
That's like we got the 78 Bixby Incredible Hulk. We're gonna have a good time.
Oh yeah, there's a lot to discuss. It's just that
I know. We're gonna just step off and be like, this is yours, Jamie. The floor is yours.
We got some 90s Spider-Man. And then I think the last episode will be where we're going. What's next?
What's next?
But what's next for you folks is to subscribe to our show. You're going to hit that button on YouTube. You're going to review it on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever else you find podcasts. I don't know what the small ones are, but go nuts. SoundCloud, I guess. We don't have a mixtape, but it's there. Of course, you can follow the show on Twitter at HollywoodADI, on Instagram at Hollywood Already Did It. We have a Facebook group, facebook.com/group/Hollywood Already Did It. I'm at, as always, Blake. Terrence is at I am Terrence Tatum. That's your Instagram.
That's
Terrence,
Instagram.
what's your Twitter?
My Twitter is at Terrence Tatum.
Jamie is at Jamie Cinematics. You're already on the Hollywood Already Did It page, where Terrence also does reviews and trailer reactions. We have a podcast called You Can't Do That Anymore, where we take problematic movies and we talk about why you can or can't do it anymore and why it worked at the time it came out. Jamie, of course, is all for wonderful work at comicbook.com and BuzzFeed and the comicbook.com's Marvel podcast. And then I do an action figure podcast called How Do You Figure, which is just a real treat. That's it. We're done.
Love you guys.
Later.